I'm Dan Graboy, and this is Life in Time of Pandemic. Today I'm talking with horn virtuoso Chris Castellanos. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. You look like you're in a totally decked out recording studio.
I am in my home studio. Uh, it's kind of decked out, but it's enough for what I need.
And you live in Utah, is that right?
I do. Yeah, I grew up in Vegas, but when I married my beautiful wife, Christina, 7 years ago, she does a lot of work in Utah. And since I'm on the road and it doesn't really matter well, I'm not on the road now, but normally when I'm on the road, it doesn't matter where I live. So, and it still
So,
doesn't.
so is your place in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, I mean it's in Bountiful, which is about 15 minutes away from Salt Lake.
Oh.
So it's easy little jaunt to the airport and to the Abravanel Hall where the symphony plays and stuff.
Mhm. So you grew up in Las Vegas, which must be that must be really something. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And you got your start playing in Las Vegas as well. Can you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about growing up and your early history as a horn player?
Yeah, so I mean, Vegas, it was a really interesting place to grow up. I mean, it's not like everybody thinks like you were in casinos and stuff when you were a kid. I mean, it's a normal place, and it's pretty large now. I think the city has 2 million people. But when I was growing up, it was quite a bit smaller. And I've always really loved living there. I mean, there's a lot going on musically. And when I was younger, my dad was a musician. He would play in like Latin bands, so salsa bands and stuff. And he played percussion and he sang and played guitar. And so I was always interested in that and the process. I remember being a little kid and going into the recording studio and watching him and his band, and it was just really cool. So I always grew up around music, and in Las Vegas there was a lot to do. So especially as a horn player, just different kind of music. My teachers were always playing on the strip, and they were always playing for really big name people who were using horns in their shows, and so it was always appealing to me.
And you grew up with, sounds like you grew up with lots of different styles of music.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, all my friends in Las Vegas, they were all taking lessons with like the doublers and
Mhm.
stuff. So everybody was playing jazz, and throughout high school and especially in college, like UNLV, it's a it's a it's a really good music school, but they were more known for their jazz department, and because a lot of students could come there and play in the jazz band, and then they'd go work on the strip and play. So they had some really hot players in the jazz band, and so for me, like all my buddies were playing jazz. So it's if we ever had a hang or anything, and they're, hey, tonight we're gonna jam, we're gonna play Aerosols, we're gonna this, that. It was like, I wanna go, I wanna play. And so they would say, well, you're welcome to play or welcome to come, but you have to play. And so that's how I started, getting involved in all different styles.
And I saw you on video playing a fantastic Wagner tuba jazz solo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I always had wanted. Well, I've been recording stuff on and off just for fun. I mean, just for self motivation for years and years. And I started just throwing it up on YouTube because why not? And um, and I remember that week I was like, okay, I'm gonna record YYZ because I had been listening to some Rush and stuff. I was like, how cool would it be to like record the guitar and the bass part and just have a drum track going along and stuff. So I transcribed that and I played it, and then but there was that guitar or there's the solo in the middle, and that week I was playing with the Utah Symphony. I was playing the offstage Wagner Tuban part at the end of Pines of Rome, and so they had given me their Tuban, and I was like, you know what, I got this thing. I'm gonna play the solo on this. So
That was
that's
fantastic.
oh, thanks.
Yeah, in my group in Meridian Arts Ensemble, we had a little flirtation with YYZ
Mm.
and ended up, we didn't end up doing it, I think, because we couldn't imagine playing it in the context of a whole concert. It was a 3-minute concert in and of itself.
Yeah, it's just like a beastly. I mean, it's so cool though. Um, and speaking of Meridian, I mean, that was one of the few chamber ensemble CDs that I had. Uh, um, like I remember having like Canadian brass CDs, and I had Empire brass CDs, and I had Meridian CDs. And so, what was the one? Smart Went Crazy. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Like, I loved that album. I wore that one out. It was so much fun to listen to. So,
Thank you. Thank you
yep.
very much. And in some ways, we've had very similar careers because we've been playing music in lots of different styles with brass players. So tell us a little bit about your brass quintet history, where you've been, where you are now.
Yeah. So, well, I've been playing in brass quintets for a long time. I mean, even when I was in high school, I used to play with, well, I kind of had gotten an early start getting to know professionals because I studied with the first call horn player on the Las Vegas Strip, whose name was Beth Lano. And she's this great player, and she would every once in a while have me play second to her on stuff uh, when I was really young. I mean, when I started playing on the strip when I was a senior in high school, and so when it was then that I started playing with brass quintets, and it was just like a weekend warrior quintet. It wasn't, I mean, they weren't weekend warrior players, but they never played concerts. It was just a reading group, and it was all pros from town, like these guys who had played with Elvis and stuff, you know. And I'm like sitting there, and by far the youngest one in the quintet, and half the rehearsal was just like jokes and shooting the stuff and all that, and then the rest of the rehearsal was just sight reading new charts with these guys. And so that's how I got my start playing in quintets, and it was really kind of trial by fire because even though it was a reading quintet, these guys could read anything and they were so good. And so if they had to stop for me, it was like, especially because they're how they were, it was just like they would just give me crap. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, the kid can't read. So it was like I had to practice and practice just so that I could like sound good in that group. And I would practice sight reading and all this stuff. But my first job as a in a brass quintet came when I was in college, and I was studying with Bill Bernatis at the time. He's a great horn player in Las Vegas, and but he, you know, he had just come from Ithaca. He was teaching in Ithaca, um, and he had played a couple shows with the Dallas Brass years before. And actually, it's funny because of him playing with the Dallas Brass and subbing with the Dallas Brass, that's how he got his job at Chautauqua that he still plays at in the summers. But so anyway, I'm yeah, I'm like moving around here. But the Dallas Brass approached him. They were looking for a new horn player, and they wanted him to audition. But he's not interested in being on the road anymore, and he's teaching full time. And I think he was the head of the chair of the brass department at the time. I just he couldn't get away like that. And he said, "But I've got a student you guys might be interested in," and that's so I auditioned, and they had me out for like to play for them, like kind of a trial, and then they invited me on a tour, and then it just rolled from then. It was kind of a 6-month process of them auditioning different people all over the place, and eventually I got the job, and I was with them for 6 years.
And as in so many cases, it starts with who you know, but then it comes down to how you play.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, it's like you get what people like to call lucky breaks, but everybody gets lucky breaks. It's just, are you ready when lucky break comes, you know? So I had fortunately, I was what they were looking for. Like they had some really, really great horn players that I'm still friends with to this day and playing great orchestras and stuff now, who were auditioning at the time. But and they all sounded great, but what set me apart was that I could play all different styles and I didn't sound awkward or out of, you know, or if they wanted me to read changes, I could read changes or something like that, you know.
Right.
So that's kind of what gave me the edge up on that job. That and I memorized everything for the like when I came in, they kind of they said, okay, we're gonna have you on tour for a month. At first, all you need to memorize are like the first and second tune, and then the tune before the closing of the first half, and then the opening of the first half, and the closing of the show. But I knew that they had the whole show memorized, so I just took the time in the week and a half that I had to prepare to just have it down, because I went in just thinking I don't want them to miss the other horn player. You know what I mean? Not like I'm going to come in and play better, but I just want them to, if they're not looking, it's like they don't miss that this is a new person or something.
I
So
hope that any young musicians who are watching this are taking careful notes because you did it right. And it makes a huge impression when someone has shown that kind of devotion to preparation.
yeah, I think that, like, looking back, I just I wanted to give them no reasons to not hire me. But now that I look at it from the other standpoint of, if I was hiring somebody, that would just show to me that this person is serious about it. They're putting in the time, and they really want it. You know, it's not just kind of like, oh, I'll go play, sure. You know,
Right. So that was, you played with Dallas Brass for 6 years. So that was around in the 90s or in the early 2000s. When was that?
that was the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, I played with them the end of 2003 through 2009,
Hmm.
2009, and then I had subbed with the Boston Brass quite a few times, and it was kind of the same situation where they asked me to play, and they asked me to play some memorized stuff, and I just kind of went all in. You know what I mean? But I wasn't expecting anything from that. I just wanted to do a good job for them, and to kind of solidify kind of a reputation of I'm going to go in and play great for whoever I'm playing for. And then when their horn player JD Shaw ended up leaving the group, they just called me and asked me if I wanted the job, because I had already essentially auditioned quite a few times, you know. And also with as you know, playing in a chamber group like that, especially when it's only 5 musicians, you definitely have to be able to get along with everybody, and not just play, but I mean, know how to interact with people in rehearsals, know how to uh, like just do what's expected of you, but also be a fun and good person to be around, because they're around you as much as they're around their families. So it's like they have to want to be around you, you know.
Absolutely. I think that those of us who spend years and years in chamber ensembles are well qualified to join the diplomatic staff of any country's foreign policy organization or run the UN. I mean,
Yeah.
these are skills that aren't taught in music schools or colleges at all, and they're so important.
Yep. I mean, it's almost as important as the playing part. I mean, I believe it's, if you're going to be freelancing at all, well, it doesn't even matter if it's freelancing or playing chamber music or sitting in an orchestra for decades. I mean, you have to get along with your colleagues and treat them with respect, even if you don't see eye to eye. And I mean, that's the way that you work, you know.
Yeah,
So
if it's not fun, then it's not fun.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Boston Brass before the pandemic was extremely busy, right? What kind of schedule were you involved with Boston Brass?
We're on the road close to 180 days a year. I mean, a lot, around 100 concerts a year, and plus master classes and residencies, and we're very busy. And it was a real drag this year. Not only, I mean, for the people who are suffering and everything. I mean, of course, you know, I don't want to downplay that, but it was real, just a bummer musically, because we had such a great season lined up this season also. It was, you know, and it was just coming up on the busy part. You know, it's like we were ready to go to, had a Russia tour that we were about to go on in May. We had a Austria tour, or a European tour that we were going to do in April, and just everything just kind of got blew up. And then not only that, but just the regular concert seasons in the States. So I mean, it was a lot of work gone. It was really unfortunate. And but I know there's so many people all over the world in the same situation. You can't really I mean, what can you do? You know, there's nothing you can do about it. Just
Nothing you can do about it, and yet you have done some stuff about it because you've been very busy, even when housebound.
yeah.
So, I mean, I'm seeing you all over the Horn Facebook pages being incredibly creative. So, tell us about some of the projects that you have been doing in order to stay creative and busy and sane in a tough time where all your concerts were canceled.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, the reason that I do this kind of stuff is because I'm inherently kind of a lazy person. It's like if I don't give myself projects to do, or if I don't tell myself, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to stop until I finish with it, and it's going to be polished enough that I'm going to put it out in front of people and not like be embarrassed or tarnished or anything like that, you know?" And but if I don't do that, I could easily like binge Netflix and eat bags of Doritos like all day long. It's just that's how I'm wired. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's being from Las Vegas. I'm kind of like an all or nothing kind of person, you know? So,
I can relate to the project mentality. If it's not a whole project, it just falls by the wayside very easily.
yeah, it's just, all of a sudden you've got all these half finished projects like laying around, like, just, yeah, anyway, that's me. So I have to devote like office hours to myself because I also don't want to hole myself up in my office and never see my family or anything like that. So I generally do everything in the morning before everybody's awake. and I mean, the multi-track thing I've been doing for years. I mean, 20 some years. I started doing that with like this 8-track cassette recorder that I had in college, and I used to record myself doing like Carrie Turner quartets or like orchestral excerpts or whatever. And I always really loved it because there's two things that you find out about yourself when you start doing that kind of thing. And number one is that your time sucks, and number two is that your pitch sucks. So it's like when you start doing this kind of thing, you you're open to like all of you're not playing with any makeup on or anything like that, it's just all of your flaws are just there, and the only way to correct it is to do it again and do it again and do it again, and you get better and you get faster, and so that's I always enjoyed that process. And uh and then about when YouTube came along, I got on YouTube around 2006 or 9, or I don't remember when it was, but then I had kind of a venue, and it's not like I have millions of people watching or anything like that, but you know, it's just a place to put when I do these projects, kind of to make sure that I'm not being lazy or anything. Now I've got a place to put them instead of just like in a stack of cassette tapes, So that's always been really fun. And then uh, and so for the past, decade, I've been putting that stuff out, and I've been preaching to students all over the world, basically. I mean, whenever I do these like college classes, and I'm teaching master classes, I always talk about recording yourself and multi-tracking yourself. And it seems it took a pandemic for everybody to finally join the join the wagon, and also the advent of making it much easier with like programs like acapella and stuff. But I mean, for me, it was, I don't know, it keeps me busy, and it's what I really enjoy.
That's
So
great. I'm sure it's very inspiring to lots of young horn players, and I do see lots of young horn players doing this multi-tracking, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not so great, but they're putting it out there, and I think they're challenging themselves in
yeah,
exactly the way, in the same challenge that you've set for yourself, except that you're mastering that challenge. And I love your description of you do it again and do it again and do it again until you get better. I mean, that's our life as creative artists.
yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, that is our life. That's how we get better. That's how anybody gets better at anything. This is just a fun way of doing it and getting better. It's like when you're multi-tracking something, it's like and you know it doesn't sound good. It's like, what's wrong? Okay, am I flat to this, or was the track that I already recorded, is that the thing that's added to? Like, what is it? It's like this puzzle that you have to fix. And then once you fixed it, it's like you have this, it's like it's a really nice feeling, you know, and you've accomplished something and you've got a nice polished product and people enjoy it. You put it out and they listen to it. Maybe they listen to 30 seconds of it. Maybe they listen to the whole thing. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they did. But the bottom line is that you put something out, that you were proactive, and that you're a better player now because you did that instead of just watching, watching something on Netflix. So
And doesn't it feel so good to have a final product?
it's the best. I mean, especially when it's a big big project that you've been working on, and that before you started, you're like, boy, I don't know if I can do this, if this is doable, or, how do I even go about starting this, or what track do I begin with, or, what I mean? It's like, how do you even start? And it takes a long time. It's going to take a long time, but when it's finished, you're proud of it, and it sounds good, and it gets passed around, and people enjoy it, and that's what we're doing this for in the long run, is so that we enjoy doing something and we've got a musical voice, and other people can like enjoy the arts, so yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think also it's important to say to students who want to do this, make sure that before you put something out, though, that you're really sure that you want to put it out. I mean, there are a lot of people who they're just starting, and they're really excited, and they maybe know it doesn't sound as good as they could, but they're like, I got to put this out because I have to. And then maybe they get a couple hundred views, or 1,000 views or something like that, and they're like, oh, I got to put something out right now, something else. It's like, don't put out too many things, or don't put out quantity over quality, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, especially if you're an artist. If you're like a musician who wants to be a performance major, it's like, make sure that you have quality control over what you're putting out, and that you're really proud of it, and that even if it takes weeks or months, then do that and put it out. It's much better to put out something that you're really truly proud of than just try to pump stuff out quickly.
Especially since the stuff lives forever now on the internet.
Forever. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, do you start, if you're doing, let's say you're doing something that comes less from the classical world and more from the rock or jazz world? Do you start with the bass line and a click track? Is that your method typically?
Well, I definitely have a click track. I mean, unless
Can't do it without a click track, and people should understand that with all of these a cappella things that they're seeing on all over YouTube and Facebook, people have a click track in their ear. Otherwise, this is not possible, and it's not happening in real time when there's more than one person.
right. I mean, the only time I don't have a click track, or I'll take the click track out, is if there are shifts in if there's a shift in tempo or something like that. I will leave the click out, and I'll play the lead line how I want to play it musically, and then I'll re-add the click back in on the new tempo. But there is a click, because if there isn't, it's just, I mean, it's hard enough to play in time with a click track. So without it, it's just going to sound wishy-washy all the time. So it's really important to have that. And then for me, uh, usually I end up recording the entire thing twice. It's like a rough draft and a final draft, because when you're starting to record, there's no pitch reference anywhere, and so maybe your bottom register is sagging or something, or you're playing something high and it's going sharp, and you'll re-listen, and or if there are really crunchy chords going on, like something will make it wrong, in another part, and you have to figure out what part that is. But so I usually do several drafts. I'll record everything with some flaws or whatever, but just to get a general what I want it to sound like, and then I'll re-record everything now that I've got some references. And if one reference If it's the bass line that I'm listening to and I'm like, yeah, that was really solid, then I'll record the melody and then I can fill it in. Or sometimes I'll record just if it's like I'm working on recording Head Over Heels by Tears for Fears right now. I'm almost done with it. And with that one, I had to start by recording like the inner voicing chords because there's a lot of seven chords that are in there constantly. And and I have to make sure those are in tune, and then I can lay the melody over that, and the or lay the bass down, and then the melody. So I mean, it's different songs require different uh, methods, and that's part of the fun.
And that is why experience is so important, because you look at a song now and you see in some way, oh, I think I'm going to have to do this. And then typically I would do the lead line next, but I can see that I need to do these chords next because I just have a feel for that.
Yeah, exactly. I know that I can't record the I'm not going to record the vocal first on this song because if I do that, the pitch of everything else will be everywhere. It has to have a solid foundation to sit on, and then you record the melody for this kind of thing.
And playing that vocal line over chords feels different than
Oh,
playing it without the chords. And that comes through in the final product.
yes. Oh, especially in this tune, because if you play it like you want to kind of play it timidly for some reason, or I want to play it kind of timidly, but it doesn't sound right if I play it that way. But now that I've laid down all the other tracks, when I play along with it, it's like playing with a karaoke track now. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, and I immediately want to play with like kind of this with kind of this attitude, like this lead singer attitude now that I didn't want to play with before everything else was there.
Right,
So
exactly. And I'm curious if you find this as well, that the playing rock and roll versus playing classical music, the style is so different. Where the emphasis goes is different. The articulation is different. Rock and roll, when you write it out, it doesn't look like it sounds at all. And without that interpretive knowledge, your recording sounds idiotic. And we've all heard some of those kinds of recordings online. Um, you learned how to play this kind of music by playing rock and roll with rock and roll artists, I think, and by playing jazz, obviously, with jazz artists. So tell us a little bit about that. Who have you played with? Who influenced you? I think we share some interests in this regard. So what do you like? Who have you played with?
well, I mean, yeah, I think that you hit on something really important, and that's that we have to listen. We have to be active listeners all the time, and a lot of time we're just kind of passively listening to stuff. But if you're actively listening to, it's like if I'll go back to this head over heels thing because I just finished recording it. It's like if you see a bass line that's like boom 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 boom, it's like if you're reading that, it's like lame. You know what I mean? But when you listen to how the bass player is playing it, like the style and the articulation that they're putting in, then it's like a whole different thing. A simple line like that can sound really hip, you know? And it's like, so that's like tenfold when it comes to different other styles, of like classic rock and like progressive rock and all that stuff. You can't just play the notes. You have to really be actively listening to the best people who do it and then mimicking that, because that's what us human beings do well. We mimic. That's how we learn everything. And uh and so anyway, I think that that's really important. I grew up listening to a lot of classic rock, and my dad was a huge fan of salsa music and of like horn bands. So for me, it was like Earth, Wind and Fire. It was Chase. It was like Chicago, Blood, Sweat and Tears, just Tower Power, like all those horn bands. I used to love that. I still do love that stuff. But I remember in my car in high school when everybody else was listening to DJ Magic Mike or whatever it was in mid 90s, I was blasting Chicago or whatever it is. And it's just listening to players like that, and just the style that they play in, uh, really helped translate to what I do, and then what I do now. And then also, when I started playing with my teachers on the strip, you can't go in and play. I'm sure you've played with a lot of people, like a lot of pop artists. Well, pop artists at the time. Like my first gig ever was playing Tony Bennett's orchestra, and I just remember she's like, "Yeah, so like if you're gonna play a staccato, it's not the same staccato as you play in orchestra, or if you're gonna, it's like okay to do this and it sounds wrong, but that's right here." And it's a whole different language. I mean, it's the same like dots over the notes and lines and the same eighth notes and quarter notes, but you speak with a different accent, you know. And if you're and if you're speaking like one way in another scenario, it just sounds totally wrong, and that annoys the other musicians around you, especially in a professional setting. So um, I remember just always just really, really, really actively listening to exactly how like what the lead trumpet player is doing. What are the trombones doing? How are they articulating this? Okay, I've got that with them. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. And now that I've been doing it for decades, I know how to lead with that kind of articulation and stuff. But it was a lot of following at first, you know.
Yeah, it's so different. It's so different from playing classical music. And again, this is the thing that especially us horn players aren't taught in music school. So we're taught
Right.
how to play the Mozart concertos and the Brahms horn trio, and you're trying to play a tune by Yes. It's very, very, very different.
Well, and the bottom line is, even if you're an amazing player and can play every note of a Yes tune, if you're not doing it in the right style, it just nobody wants to hear it because it just kind of sounds like Ricky Ticky, kind of like elevatory, you know? And it's like that's not what you're going for. I mean, as a musician, you want that like edge to it, and you're not going to get that edge from classical articulation in jazz or rock or pop or any commercial music.
Right.
So
Well, I
yeah.
had an interesting experience when I got to Madison and the horn in the horn choir. We became a rock band for the spring semester, which we do every spring,
uh,
and and now my students do the arranging for the group, and they will arrange. Someone will arrange a song that everybody knows. They all have heard it a million times, but then you pick the horn up and put the mouthpiece to your lips and you start playing it like it's classical music because that training is run so deeply. And it often makes me wonder, and I wonder if you've had this same thought go through your head. So we're playing whatever song it is and we're playing it completely wrong because we're speaking with an accent, like you say, which is a great description. What about our Mozart fourth horn concerto? Are we also missing important stuff in that? What about our Brahms trio? What about the Tchaikovsky fifth horn solo? What kind of stylistic stuff is lying there below the surface of what's written on the page that we're missing? And how can we get there? How can we find that stuff?
hmm, that's an interesting question. I'm a firm believer in listening, in brass players listening to people who aren't brass players. And I think if you're going to be playing Mozart, you really need to be listening to piano players. You really need to be listening to pianists, or violinists. You really, the people who have the brunt of the library, and the people who are just scholars on that sort of music.
And the operas for Mozart, for
And
sure.
the operas. I mean, yeah, it's just, so you want to kind of study up. A lot of people, especially horn players, are really we're really guilty of just kind of going, oh, yeah, I played the Mozart in junior high, or what I mean, it's like I've been there, done that kind of thing, and it's like, have you? I don't know, maybe you've played the notes, but so it's really important to be listening to different instruments. If you're going to be playing romantic music, you need to really get into it. You need to listen to great opera singers or cellists, or I mean, it's just really being proactive in listening to the composer, not just the piece, that singular piece that the composer wrote. Um, and then but on the other side, I think that it's important to have your own voice when you're a soloist, you know? I mean, I when I'm in master classes, I like to ask about interpretation, and I like to ask about why you're playing something a certain way and also who you listen to. But another important aspect is that you have something unique to offer in your performance. And I think that it's funny that classical musicians are usually the first ones to get on pop musicians for like, oh, they're redoing this song. Why can't they come up with anything original? Or, you know, they're all over them. Yet we've been playing the same thing the same way for hundreds of years, and don't offer any new sort of not like you're going to play Mozart in a completely different tempo or anything like that, but just at least some different things, you know, just something that makes it interesting for the listener to hear Mozart or Strauss for the 20th time, you know, and why are they going to listen to you? So
And classical music's a very conservative business.
yeah.
It stays the same, and um, we often don't like mavericks.
Right. Yeah, I sometimes I worry about that. Sometimes I think, ah, maybe, you know, if I'm putting out something like YYZ, if people are like, you know, but now I'm just at the point where I don't really care all that much. I mean, I know where my fortes are. I know what I have a fun time doing on my instrument. I know what my voice is, and I guess that comes with age also. It's like, you know, I'm in my 40s now. I'm kind of, uh, s- you know, I know who I am, and I'm not worried about, you know, somebody writing some snarky thing and bringing me down or something like that. It's not going to happen. I just don't care, you know. So I think that, but yeah, I think it's really important to have a good grasp of what you're trying to achieve, the history of what you're trying to achieve, and then putting some of yourself into that to make it interesting, unique, and you.
As you know, orchestra auditions have become largely about complete mastery. So, perfect time, perfect intonation, very few missed notes, that kind of playing, crisp, clear articulation. These things get you through the rounds of an orchestra audition, whereas a novel interpretation can get you eliminated right away. And
Sure.
because again, classical music is very historically grounded. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you think that maybe this pandemic, since nobody's taking orchestra auditions now, no orchestra is performing now, and we're in a different world, at least temporarily, might this open up a window of creativity like your window has been open your whole career for people to say, now I'm going to try playing Indian music on the horn, and I'm going to play, you know, YYZ on the horn, and and that's okay. It's like, are we seeing a curtain open that maybe wouldn't have otherwise? I'm always looking for silver linings here as I sit in my basement studio.
Well, I certainly hope so. You know, I mean, I really hope so. I think that every time in history that there's been something that happens like this, there's kind of a renaissance in the arts a little bit, you know, or a lot bit. And and I don't think it's any different now. Actually, I think it's accelerated because the world is so small because of this, what we're doing right now. And and I think it's like I said, I think it's really important for everybody to have their own voice. And if you love Indian music, why not play Indian music? Why not uh you know, experiment with quarter tones and the tonality of Indian music? Or if you're really into gospel music, I mean, you know, it's like you hear players like Wycliffe Gordon playing the trombone, and it's like when he plays, it's like you forget that he's playing a trombone. It's like somebody is singing, like somebody is in front of like a huge gospel choir, just like belting. And it's cool and it's awesome. And it's like, so, but that's not looked at as like so out there for a trombone player to do that. And then hearing, you know, Alessi play with the New York Phil. It, for some reason, horn is like in this like little box, and it's like if a horn player does anything but play a Mahler symphony, like everybody's like, what is that?" You know what I mean? Or it's like, so I don't know why that is, but I would love to see it expanded. I know that I mean, horn players are at large a really intellectual group, and they're diverse, and diverse musically also. And I think that we need to show that diversity as horn players, not be afraid to. I think, you know what it is? I think that a lot of times horn players are afraid to experiment or step out of the box because we spend so much time just trying to sound good doing what we do.
We spend our entire education trying to get into that box.
Right. And it's like, okay, I've been working my butt off to sound great for years and years, and now I would like to try playing some jazz, but I don't want to sound stupid. I don't want to go back to seventh grade, so I'm just not going to try. And I think that that's a bummer because, yeah, sure, you are going to go back to seventh grade, and you're not going to sound the way you want for a while. But, after months, after years, if you decide that every day you're going to take 20 minutes and like practice chord changes on iReal Pro on the app, after half a year, you're going to be really surprised at what you can do and how much better your ear is for classical music, also for everything. Just, you're going to be a better musician altogether. So why not? Especially, why don't do it if the only reason you're not doing it is because you're afraid to sound awkward or bad or whatever. So yeah, I think that that's really important. And there's never been a better time in history to be curious and to step outside of that box. you know Now, it used to, before Aebersalds, you had to actually jam with people and have a rhythm section with you. And then Aebersalds came along. I don't know if people know what I mean by Aebersalds, but Jamie Aebersald put out like these really cool jazz kind of music minus one things
Blues in all keys, kind
in
of.
all keys, except that he didn't put out the books in F. So I always had the C books or the E flat books, but which made the learning curve a little harder. But still, that was available. And now there's programs on your iPhone or your iPad or whatever, like iReal Pro, and it's like you can literally download thousands of like jazz standards and just select I play the horn or I play the instrument in F, and it will transpose those changes to F. And not only that, but you can put it in a mode where it will show you exactly what notes that you can play in that chord, and then you can turn that off if you want. You can select the tempos, you can select the styles, you can select, it's endless. And why not? Why? It's $11 or something like that. Come
It's
on.
a fantastic, fantastic app, and it also has rock tunes.
And it has rock. Yeah.
You sometimes have to go hunting around for the tune you want, but you can find them.
Yeah. So, it's really cool that like a person like you is teaching at a university because students need to be doing this kind of thing. It's not going to make you a worse musician. I know that. It's going to make you a better musician. And so with a professor like you, they're getting so much more knowledge, some than they would just if they were practicing excerpts or if they were playing etude books or something like that. They're opening up their ears, and the bigger our ears are, the better musicians we become.
That's nice of you to say. And I think that part of the answer to your question, why would I go do this other thing, is that, well, if I do the excerpt thing, then I can get a job. Now there aren't jobs. At least right now, at the present moment, it's June 18th. There aren't jobs for musicians. So this is the time not to think about what can I do to get a job, but to think about artistry.
Yeah. How can I be a better player? How can I make it so that my voice is stronger, or that my ears connect to my voice better? As singers, they really hone in on getting exactly what they want across from their head. And us musicians, a lot of times we're preoccupied with just trying to trying to make the instrument work, and then it's music next. It's always like mechanics first, music after, which is totally backwards when it comes to music.
Couldn't
So,
agree with you more.
yeah. And if we're thinking about the music first, I don't know about you, but when I'm performing, when I'm playing, if I'm playing by memory and I'm just basically playing along with the karaoke track in my head, I miss a lot less stuff than when I'm thinking just, oh, technically or something like that. So I mean, I think it's important. Our bodies naturally, our minds naturally want to go to music first, and we need to allow that to happen.
Have you thought about looking for an academic job like mine? I think you'd be absolutely terrific.
Oh, thank you. I have thought about it. You know, I just my touring schedule has been for a long time has been really uh, rigorous. Um, and also, I didn't have any sort of degree. I hadn't finished my bachelor's because I started touring before and everything. So that kind of that puts a dent in things or whatever. It's a little bit hard to get a teaching job when you don't have a bachelor's degree. Although I do have a bachelor's now. I finished it online. It was a funny story. I had played Boston Brass came over and played at my old college at UNLV, at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the dean of the School of Music was there, and she loved the concert, and she goes, "Oh, it's just so great to see an alum up on the stage." And I was like, "Well, technically, I'm not an alum." She's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Well, I started touring before I finished my bachelor's, and at that point, there was no such thing as online courses or anything like that." And so she's like, "Well, we got to get you finished." And so she kind of figured out what I had left, and I finished it up while I was on the road this last year. So at least I've got that. Which was actually a little bit difficult too, because we were like touring China, and I had to have like essays in at a certain time, and I was trying to do like time zone math in my head, like, is this due tomorrow or yesterday, or you know? So, but yeah, everything worked out, and but to answer your question, I am going to start thinking much more about that, because I think teaching is important. I think it's important to be able to leave a musical legacy in your students. I think they're the future. I mean, it's like I see all these like rising star students and these really great musicians who go on to be educators, who go on to be performers, or go on to a different entire walk of life, and then they become supporters of the arts. So I think that it's just what teachers do is incredibly important, and I would definitely like to be part of that at some point. I just I need to get on it. So maybe I can come get a master's with you, then I could get a job.
That sounds great. We'll just play duets for a couple of years.
Sounds good to me.
Thanks so much for talking to me. It's been great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay.